My name is Henry, and I'm 35 years old. When I needed financial support the most, my family abandoned me. They gave my siblings $200,000 each, but excluded me without any clear explanation. For years, I struggled alone while watching them thrive with that financial head start. Now that I've built my own success from nothing, guess who suddenly reappeared with outstretched hands? The same family who left me to fend for myself. Now, I face a decision that could change everything. Before I tell you how I responded when my family came crawling back, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button so you won't miss more shocking real-life stories like this one. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in the suburbs of Boston. Our family consisted of my father Richard, who was 54, my mother Margaret, who was 52, my older brother Jason, who was 37, my older sister Samantha, who was 38, and my younger sister Melissa, who was 30. My father worked as an accountant at a respectable firm downtown, while my mother taught at the local elementary school. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, with our colonial-style house, well-maintained lawn, and annual family vacations to Cape Cod. But beneath that picture-perfect facade, I always felt like the odd one out. My parents never tried to hide their favoritism. Jason was the athletic star of the family, playing quarterback for our high school football team and bringing home trophies that my father proudly displayed in our living room. Every conversation at the dinner table seemed to revolve around Jason's latest game or college scouts who were interested in him. Samantha was the beauty of the family. With her perfect blonde hair and magnetic personality, she was homecoming queen and everyone's favorite. My mother would spend hours shopping with her, helping her prepare for school dances and planning her future. They were more like best friends than mother and daughter. Then there was Melissa, the baby of the family. Being the youngest, she naturally received special treatment. Every minor achievement was celebrated as if she had won a Nobel Prize. When she struggled in school, my parents hired expensive tutors without hesitation. Her room was always filled with the latest toys and gadgets. And then there was me, Henry, the forgotten middle child. I wasn't particularly athletic or outstandingly handsome. I was just average in most ways, except for my interest in computers and technology. But that wasn't something my family valued or understood. While Jason received thunderous applause at his games, my coding projects were met with confused nods or complete indifference. The disparity in how we were treated became more obvious as we grew older. When Jason turned 16, my parents surprised him with a brand new Ford Mustang. They said he deserved it for making it to the state championships. When my 16th birthday came around a year later, I was handed the keys to my grandmother's old Toyota Corolla that had over 100,000 miles on it. I was told to be grateful because many kids don't even get a car. After Samantha graduated high school, my parents sent her on a 3-week trip across Europe as a graduation present. She visited Paris, Rome, and Barcelona, sending back pictures of herself posing in front of famous landmarks. When I graduated with honors 2 years later, I received a watch and a dinner at the local steakhouse. Despite the obvious favoritism, I kept trying to earn my parents' approval. I joined the computer club at school, participated in science fairs, and maintained a high GPA. But no matter what I achieved, it never seemed to measure up to Jason's touchdown passes or Samantha's social success. My sanctuary became the basement, where I set up a small workspace for my computer projects. I saved up from my part-time job at the local electronics store to buy components, and taught myself programming languages by watching online tutorials. While my siblings were out at parties or sports events with my parents cheering them on, I was teaching myself Java and dreaming of creating something revolutionary. My parents rarely came down to see what I was working on. When they did, their eyes would glaze over as I excitedly explained my latest project. "That's nice, Henry," they'd say before quickly changing the subject to something about one of my siblings. The only person who showed any interest was Mr. Patterson, my high school computer science teacher. He recognized my passion and talent, often staying after school to help me with advanced concepts or lending me books from his personal collection. "You've got a gift, Henry," he told me once. "Someday you'll build something that will change the world." I clung to those words during family dinners, when I felt invisible during Christmas mornings, when my presents were noticeably less expensive than my siblings, and during parent-teacher conferences, when my mother and father seemed surprised by my teacher's praise. Despite feeling like an outsider in my own family, I developed a quiet determination. I decided that someday, I would prove my worth not just to my family, but to myself. I dreamed of becoming a tech entrepreneur, of building something meaningful that would impact millions of people. That dream became my driving force, pushing me through the loneliness and hurt of being the least favorite child. Little did I know that the worst form of favoritism was yet to come, and that it would shape the course of my future in ways I couldn't imagine. My senior year of high school brought a glimmer of validation that I had long been seeking. After countless late nights studying and preparing, I scored in the 99th percentile on my SATs. This achievement, combined with my 4.0 GPA and the impressive portfolio of coding projects I had developed, earned me a partial scholarship to Massachusetts Institute of Technology. MIT had been my dream school since I was 14, and when the acceptance letter arrived, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and accomplishment. I rushed to share the news with my family, expecting at least this once to receive the enthusiastic response that my siblings' achievements always garnered. My mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I told her. "That's nice, honey," she said, barely looking up from the pot she was stirring. "We always knew you were smart." My father's reaction was similarly underwhelming. "MIT? That's going to be expensive," was his first comment, followed by "Jason got a full ride to Boston College for football, you know." There was no celebration dinner, no proud phone calls to relatives, no congratulatory cake, like when Jason received his athletic scholarship, or when Samantha was accepted to her chosen college. My achievement was acknowledged with the same enthusiasm as if I'd mentioned getting a haircut. Still, I held on to hope that my parents recognized the significance of my accomplishment, even if they didn't express it in the same way they did for my siblings. That hope was shattered during a family meeting held in our living room the summer before I left for college. My father gathered us all together one Sunday afternoon in July. He and my mother sat side by side on the sofa, looking unusually serious. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the background as we all waited to hear what this meeting was about. "Your mother and I have been planning for your futures since you were born." My father began, his voice taking on the formal tone he used when discussing important matters. "We've been putting money aside in what we call the education fund for each of you." My heart lifted. Perhaps this was why they hadn't seemed overly concerned about my college expenses. They had been saving for this all along. "Now that you're all either in college or heading that way, it's time to discuss how this money will be distributed," he continued. "We've set aside $200,000 for each of you to help you start your adult lives." I sat up straighter, already calculating how this would cover the remainder of my MIT tuition after my scholarship. This would mean I could focus entirely on my studies without having to work multiple jobs to make ends meet. "Jason," my father said, turning to my older brother, "you've already used part of your fund for college, but the rest is available for you to put a down payment on a house now that you've graduated." Jason nodded, looking pleased, but not surprised, as if he had always expected this. "Samantha, you've expressed interest in opening your own beauty salon. Your fund is available whenever you're ready to move forward with that plan." My sister beamed already, describing the location she had been eyeing. "And, Melissa," my father continued, looking at my younger sister, "your fund will cover your upcoming semester abroad in Paris and the remainder of your education at NYU." I waited for my father to address me next, but instead, he clasped his hands together and said, "Any questions?" Confused, I raised my hand slightly, feeling like I was in school rather than at a family meeting. "What about my education fund?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. My parents exchanged a glance that I couldn't quite interpret. Henry, my mother, finally said, her voice gentler than my father's, but with a firmness that brooked no argument. "You've received a scholarship to MIT. You've always been so independent and resourceful. We're confident you'll be fine." I felt as though all the air had been sucked from my lungs. "But my scholarship only covers about 30% of the tuition. MIT is one of the most expensive universities in the country." My father cleared his throat. "We believe in you, Henry. You'll figure it out. You always do." "But why?" I pressed my voice, rising slightly. "Why does everyone else get $200,000 and I get nothing?" "It's not that you get nothing," my father said, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. You got a scholarship which is more than any of your siblings received. We're just distributing resources where they're needed most." I looked around at my siblings, hoping for support but found none. Jason was already on his phone, probably looking at real estate listings. Samantha was sketching design ideas for her salon on a notepad. Melissa was texting, likely telling her friends about her upcoming semester in Paris. In that moment, the years of feeling less valued, less important, less loved than my siblings crystallized into a sharp, undeniable reality. This wasn't just about money. It was about my place in this family. I was the outsider, the one who was expected to make it on his own, while the others received support and validation. Over the next few weeks, I watched as my siblings excitedly made plans with their newfound wealth. Jason purchased a 3-bedroom townhouse in a desirable neighborhood of Boston. Samantha leased a space for her salon and began renovations. Melissa shopped for new clothes and luggage for her Parisian adventure. Meanwhile, I applied for student loans, researched part-time jobs near campus, and calculated how many hours I would need to work each week to afford books, food, and housing. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or painful. My first semester at MIT was a brutal adjustment. While my peers often spent evenings collaborating on projects or socializing, I rushed from classes to my job at the campus library, then to a second job working night shifts at a local convenience store. On weekends, I picked up gig work doing computer repairs and basic website development for small businesses. Despite working nearly 40 hours a week on top of my challenging course load, I could barely keep up with my expenses. There were nights I survived on ramen noodles and free coffee from the computer lab. My roommate, who came from a wealthy family in Connecticut, would often offer to treat me to meals out of pity, which only made me feel worse. The physical and mental exhaustion took its toll. I developed dark circles under my eyes that became a permanent feature. My weight dropped as meals became an afterthought. Several times I nearly fell asleep during exams after pulling all-nighters to finish assignments because my work schedule left little time for studying. During holiday breaks, when I returned home, the disparity was even more apparent. Jason would talk about renovations to his house, Samantha about the growing clientele at her salon, and Melissa would show off photos from her adventures abroad. My parents would listen raptly, asking questions and offering advice. When the conversation turned to me, I would downplay my struggles. MIT is challenging, but I'm managing. I would say, not mentioning the nights I cried from exhaustion or the times I considered dropping out because the financial burden seemed insurmountable. What hurt the most wasn't just the financial disparity, but the emotional one. Not once did my parents call to check on me or ask if I needed help. When I did reach out, their responses were perfunctory and brief. "Just work hard, and it will all be worth it," my father would say, before changing the subject. By the time I was in my junior year, the feeling of betrayal had hardened into a quiet determination. I would succeed not because of my family, but despite them. I would build something so impressive that they would have to acknowledge their mistake in underestimating me. Little did I know that the seeds of my future success were being planted during those grueling years of struggle and solitude. I graduated from MIT with a degree in computer engineering, a mountain of student debt totaling $80,000, and a determination that had been forged in the fire of necessity. The ceremony was a bittersweet moment. While I felt immense pride in my accomplishment, especially considering the obstacles I had overcome, the absence of genuine enthusiasm from my family cast a shadow over the day. My parents attended the graduation ceremony, of course. They even took photos and posted them on Facebook with captions about how proud they were of their son, the MIT graduate. But there was a hollowness to their congratulations, a performance quality that I had become adept at recognizing over the years. After graduation, I faced the harsh reality of the job market. Despite my prestigious degree, breaking into top-tier tech companies proved more challenging than I anticipated. I applied to Google, Apple, Microsoft, and numerous startups in Silicon Valley. I made it through several rounds of interviews but never received an offer. After 3 months of rejections and dwindling savings, I finally accepted a position at a small startup called Next Tech Solutions. The salary was below market rate for someone with my qualifications, but I couldn't afford to keep searching. My student loan payments were about to kick in, and I was already eating into the emergency fund I had painstakingly built during college. My first apartment in San Francisco was a far cry from the luxury condos many of my classmates moved into after securing six-figure salaries at major tech companies. I rented a room in a rundown house, shared with 4 other people. My space was barely large enough for a twin bed and a small desk where I set up my computer. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every conversation my housemates had, every show they watched, and even their alarms going off in the morning. My daily meals consisted mainly of instant ramen peanut butter sandwiches and whatever was on sale at the grocery store that week. I calculated each expense down to the penny, often choosing between necessities like new work clothes or replacing my worn-out laptop. To supplement my income, I took on freelance coding projects on weekends and evenings. After working a full 8-hour day at Nextech, I would come home, eat a quick dinner, and then work another 4 to 6 hours on websites and small applications for clients I found online. Some nights, I didn't go to bed until 2 or 3 in the morning, only to wake up at 6:30 to start the cycle again. During this time, my interactions with my family became increasingly infrequent. We spoke on holidays and birthdays, but the conversations were superficial. They never asked about my financial situation, and I never volunteered the information. Pride prevented me from admitting just how much I was struggling. When I did visit home for Christmas or Thanksgiving, the contrast between my siblings' lives and mine was stark. Jason had been promoted to a management position at his company and had recently bought a boat. Samantha's beauty salon was thriving, and she was considering opening a second location. Melissa had graduated and was working at a prestigious marketing firm in New York, living in a luxurious apartment paid for with what remained of her education fund. Meanwhile, I was wearing the same clothes I had owned since college, taking the bus instead of owning a car, and calculating if I could afford to buy gifts for everyone or if I should make something instead. Despite these hardships, I was learning valuable skills at Nextech. We were working on data management systems, and I became intimately familiar with how companies handled personal information and the vulnerabilities in their security protocols. It was during a particularly late night at the office that the idea first occurred to me. I had been reading about another major data breach at a large corporation where millions of users had their personal information exposed. The company had been using outdated security measures that any decent hacker could bypass. I thought to myself, there has to be a better way to protect personal data. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with ideas for a personal data security application that would give individual users control over their information rather than leaving it in the hands of corporations. I got up at 3 in the morning and started sketching out the concept, writing code snippets, and researching existing solutions. For the next year, I lived a double life. During the day, I was a diligent employee at Nextech, but nights and weekends belonged to my project, which I called Data Shield. I envisioned an application that would create a secure personal data vault for users with advanced encryption and the ability to monitor and control how their information was being used across the internet. I worked on Data Shield with a fervor bordering on obsession. My social life, already minimal, became non-existent. My health suffered as I averaged 4 to 5 hours of sleep per night. But the project gave me purpose, a North Star to follow through the darkness of my financial struggles and familial disappointment. The turning point came when I attended a tech conference in San Francisco. I had scraped together the money for a ticket because I knew there would be potential investors present. During a networking session, I struck up a conversation with Paul Anderson, an angel investor known for taking chances on innovative security solutions. I gave Paul my elevator pitch about Data Shield, explaining how it would revolutionize personal data security in an increasingly vulnerable digital landscape. To my surprise, he didn't dismiss me immediately, as others had. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely intrigued by the concept. "Send me your business plan and a demo of what you've built so far," he said, before handing me his card. "I see potential in this, and more importantly, I see passion in you." Those words gave me the courage to take the biggest risk of my life. 2 weeks after meeting Paul, after sending him my detailed business plan and a prototype of Data Shield, I quit my job at Nextech to focus on developing my application full-time. I had enough savings to last about 3 months if I cut my expenses to the absolute minimum. Those 3 months were the most challenging of my life. I moved to an even smaller, cheaper room in a worse neighborhood to extend my runway. I ate 1 meal a day, usually rice with whatever protein was cheapest that week. I coded for 16 to 18 hours daily, fueled by cheap coffee and the desperate knowledge that failure meant financial ruin. There were moments of deep doubt and fear, nights when I would stare at the ceiling questioning my decision to leave the security of a regular paycheck, days when a bug would seem insurmountable, and I'd wonder if I was fooling myself about my abilities, times when seeing posts on social media about my siblings' vacations and purchases would send me into a spiral of bitterness and self-pity. But I kept going. When the prototype crashed a week before my scheduled presentation to Paul and his investment group, I stayed awake for 36 hours straight to rebuild it. When my laptop died, I used my last credit card to buy a refurbished one. When I received an email from my student loan servicer threatening collections due to missed payments, I called them and begged for forbearance. The day of my presentation to Paul's investment group arrived. I hadn't slept in 2 days. My shirt was wrinkled because I couldn't afford to replace the broken iron in my shared house, and I had to borrow money from a roommate to take an Uber to the meeting because public transportation would have made me late. As I stood before the group of 5 investors, including Paul, I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was my moment, the culmination of years of being overlooked, underestimated, and left to fend for myself. I had built DataShield from nothing but my own determination and belief in its value. I gave the presentation of my life that day, demonstrating DataShield's capabilities, explaining its market potential, and sharing my vision for how it could transform data security for everyday users. When I finished, there was a moment of silence that felt like an eternity. Then Paul smiled and said 7 words that would change everything. "I think we have something special here, Henry." 2 years after that pivotal meeting with Paul and his investment group, DataShield officially launched to the public. The journey to that point had been arduous, filled with countless revisions, late nights of coding, and moments of doubt. But with Paul's initial investment of $500,000 and his guidance, I had been able to refine my vision into a viable product. The launch exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Tech blogs picked up the story praising DataShield for its innovative approach to personal data security. Finally, a solution that puts control back in the hands of users, wrote TechCrunch in their feature article. Users began signing up at a rate we hadn't anticipated, creating a temporary server overload that my small team and I worked frantically to address. Within weeks of the launch, representatives from major tech companies began reaching out. They were interested in integrating DataShield's technology into their own platforms or discussing potential partnerships. It was surreal to sit across conference tables from executives of companies I had applied to and been rejected by just a few years earlier. The most surprising development came 3 months after our launch. A representative from Google contacted me to schedule a meeting. I assumed they wanted to discuss a partnership similar to what other companies had proposed. Instead, they presented an offer to acquire DataShield for $30 million. The figure was staggering. $30 million would erase my debt, secure my financial future, and validate all the years of struggle and sacrifice. The Google executives looked confident as they laid out their offer, clearly expecting an enthusiastic acceptance. "I appreciate the offer," I told them after a moment of consideration, "but I'm not interested in selling DataShield at this time." Their surprise was evident. Few startup founders turned down that kind of money, especially for a company as young as mine. But I had a vision for DataShield that extended beyond a quick acquisition. More importantly, I had something to prove not just to my family but to myself. I hadn't come this far to hand over my creation before seeing its full potential realized. With the increased attention and growing user base, I was able to secure a second round of funding, this time for $12 million. This allowed me to move DataShield out of the shared co-working space we had been using and into our own offices in downtown San Francisco. I hired a team of talented engineers, many from top tech companies who believed in our mission enough to leave their secure positions. Our team grew from just me and 2 part-time developers to a staff of 35 within 6 months. Each new hire brought fresh perspectives and skills that enhanced DataShield's capabilities. We expanded our services to include business solutions alongside our consumer application, creating secure data management systems for companies concerned about protecting their customers' information. 1 year after our launch, DataShield was valued at $150 million. I had gone from struggling to pay rent to having a net worth that put me in the category of tech millionaire. The financial transformation was dramatic. I moved from my shared room in a rundown house to a modern apartment in one of San Francisco's most desirable neighborhoods. I replaced my 10-year-old laptop with state-of-the-art equipment. I bought a Tesla partly because I appreciated the technology and partly because I could finally afford a car that wasn't on the verge of breaking down. But the most satisfying purchase I made wasn't for myself. I anonymously paid off the student loans of 5 random MIT students, who, like me, had been working multiple jobs to finance their education. It was my way of easing the burden for others who were walking the path I had struggled along. My public profile began to rise, along with DataShield's success. I was invited to speak at tech conferences, interviewed for industry publications, and asked to participate in panel discussions about data security and privacy. TechCrunch named me one of their 30 under 40 innovators in the tech industry with a feature that detailed my journey from MIT graduate to successful founder. Despite these external validations, I often felt a sense of emptiness when I returned to my expensive apartment at the end of the day. Success was sweeter than I had imagined, but it was also more solitary. The people who should have been celebrating with me, my family, had been absent throughout the struggle and remained distant during the triumph. In a moment of perhaps naive optimism, I sent formal invitations to my parents and siblings for the grand opening of DataShield's new headquarters. We had taken over an entire floor in a gleaming skyscraper with views of the bay, a far cry from the cramped co-working space where we had started. The event would include a tour of the facilities, a demonstration of our latest security features, and a reception with investors and industry partners. I had hoped that seeing the physical manifestation of my success might bridge the gap that had widened between us over the years. Perhaps it would even prompt a conversation about why they had excluded me from the financial support they had so readily provided to my siblings. The day of the grand opening arrived. The office looked spectacular, with our logo prominently displayed in the reception area and workspaces that reflected the innovative spirit of our company. Investors, partners, and employees mingled, enjoying catered food and champagne. Paul gave a touching speech about his faith in my vision from the beginning, which received enthusiastic applause. Throughout the event, I found myself glancing toward the entrance, watching for familiar faces that never appeared. No one from my family attended. Later that evening, I received a text message from my mother. "Congratulations on your new office. Sorry we couldn't make it. Your father had a golf tournament, and we had already committed to attending." I stared at the message for a long time, noting that she didn't mention what had prevented my siblings from attending. The hurt was familiar, but no less acute for its familiarity. Here I was hosting an event celebrating a company valued at $150 million, and my family couldn't be bothered to show up. That night, after everyone had left, and I was alone in my new office, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. I had achieved more than I ever thought possible. I had proven my worth by any objective measure. But the validation I had secretly hoped would come from my family still eluded me. Little did I know that family recognition would come eventually, but not in the way I had imagined. It would take another 2 years, and circumstances I couldn't have predicted for my family to acknowledge my success. And when they did, it would force me to confront questions about forgiveness, obligation, and the true meaning of success that no amount of money could answer. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my assistant interrupted a product development meeting to inform me that my mother was on the phone. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. In the 2 years since DataShield had become a success, communication with my family had been minimal and largely superficial birthday calls and obligatory holiday greetings. For my mother to call me in the middle of a workday was unprecedented. "Henry, is that you?" Her voice sounded older than I remembered, with an unusual hint of hesitation. "Yes, Mom. Is everything okay?" I asked immediately, concerned that something catastrophic must have happened for her to reach out like this. "Everything is fine," she assured me quickly. I saw that article about you in Business Insider. The one that called you a data security visionary. Your father and I were just so proud of what you've accomplished." The compliment so long awaited felt strangely hollow, coming now after years of indifference. I mumbled a thank you, unsure how to respond to this sudden interest in my career. "How are you doing?" "The article mentioned you've expanded internationally now." She continued, displaying more knowledge about my business than she had ever shown before. We spoke for about 15 minutes with my mother asking detailed questions about DataShield and my life in San Francisco. Not once did she mention the grand opening she had missed or the years of silence between us. The conversation ended with her saying, "We miss you, Henry. You should visit sometime." I hung up feeling unsettled. After 2 years of radio silence about my success, why the sudden interest? I tried to dismiss my suspicions, telling myself that perhaps the public recognition had finally made my achievements real to her in a way that my private struggles and triumphs had not. A week later, my father called. Like my mother's call, this was unusual enough to be alarming. "Son, it's been too long," he said, his voice carrying the forced joviality I remembered from childhood when he was trying to smooth over something uncomfortable. "Your mother and I were thinking it would be nice to have the whole family together. It's been years since all of us sat down for a proper meal." He invited me to come home for dinner the following weekend, emphasizing that Jason, Samantha, and Melissa would all be there. A family reunion of sorts, he called it. I agreed more out of curiosity than enthusiasm. As I booked my flight to Boston, I couldn't shake the feeling that these sudden overtures had a purpose beyond family reconciliation. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, a testament to suburban stability. As I pulled my rental car into the driveway, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for whatever awaited me inside. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell, enveloping me in a hug that felt both familiar and strange. "Henry, look at you all, grown up and successful," she exclaimed, as if my adulthood were a recent development rather than something that had been progressing for the past decade. Inside, the scene was set for a picture-perfect family dinner. The dining room table was elegantly arranged with the good china that only came out for special occasions. The smell of my mother's pot roast, a childhood favorite I hadn't tasted in years, filled the air. My father stood by the fireplace, nursing a glass of whiskey. He shook my hand, firmly patting my shoulder with his other hand. "The prodigal son returns," he said, with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jason, Samantha, and Melissa arrived within minutes of each other. Their greetings were cordial, but strained, as if they weren't quite sure how to interact with me anymore. I noticed immediately that they all looked more worn than I would have expected. Jason's designer clothes seemed a season or two old. Samantha's typically immaculate makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and Melissa's smile appeared forced. Dinner began with careful small-talk, weather, local news, innocuous updates about distant relatives. My mother kept serving me extra portions, insisting I was too thin despite my healthy appearance. My father repeatedly refilled my wine glass, while asking surface-level questions about life in California. It wasn't until dessert was served that the facade began to crack. My father cleared his throat, setting down his fork beside the apple pie he had barely touched. "Henry, we've been following your success with DataShield. It's quite remarkable what you've built." His tone was different now, more serious. "In fact, your achievements have been a bright spot for the family during what has been a challenging time." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "You see," he went on, glancing at my siblings, "things haven't gone as planned for everyone." Over the next hour, the true state of my family's finances unfolded like a tragedy in slow motion. Jason had invested most of his $200,000, along with a second mortgage on his house, in a friend's restaurant venture. The business had failed spectacularly, leaving him with crushing debt. He had been forced to sell his house and was now renting a small apartment, his credit score in shambles. Samantha's beauty salon had initially thrived, but had been devastated by a combination of increased competition and poor location. She had expanded too quickly, opening a second location that drained her resources before closing both shops 6 months ago. She was now working as an employee at a chain salon, making barely enough to cover her rent. Melissa's story was perhaps the most surprising. She had dropped out of her study abroad program in Paris after just 1 semester, returned to the States, and burned through the remainder of her education fund on what she vaguely described as finding herself. Now 30, she was living back at home, with our parents working part-time at a coffee shop while half-heartedly applying to graduate programs. But the most shocking revelation was about my parents. My father had retired earlier than planned due to health issues that he hadn't disclosed to me. My mother had also left her teaching position to care for him. Their retirement savings, which should have been substantial after decades of careful planning, had been severely depleted by their efforts to help my siblings recover from their financial disasters. "We've been helping them get back on their feet," my mother explained, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "Jason needed money for lawyers when the restaurant creditors came after him personally. Samantha needed help closing her salon leases without declaring bankruptcy. And Melissa, well, we've done what parents do," my father interjected. "We've supported our children when they needed us." The irony of his statement hung in the air between us. I thought of the lonely nights in my MIT dorm room calculating how many more hours I would need to work to afford textbooks. I remembered the times I had skipped meals to save money, the constant stress of mounting student loans, the years of struggling alone, while they lavished support on my siblings. After coffee was served, my father finally came to the point of this elaborately staged family reunion. "Henry," he said, his voice taking on the tone he used to use when asking for a favor from business associates, "we find ourselves in a difficult position. The truth is, we're at risk of losing the house." My mother picked up the thread. "The mortgage is underwater after we refinanced to help Jason with his legal troubles. We've missed 2 payments already. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We need $300,000, my father stated bluntly. "It would clear the mortgage and give us enough to stabilize our situation. We wouldn't ask if we had any other option." Then came the statement that nearly made me laugh out loud. "You've always been the smart one, Henry," my father said, as if this had been his opinion all along. "We always knew you would go far. You're the family's pride son. You've built something remarkable through your own brilliance and determination." My mother reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "We've always believed in you, Henry. Even when we couldn't help financially, we knew you had what it takes to succeed on your own." I looked around the table at the family that had excluded me, forgotten me, and dismissed my achievements until they needed something from me. Jason couldn't meet my eyes. Samantha was studying her coffee cup intently. Melissa was the only one watching me, her expression a mixture of hope and shame. Part of me wanted to stand up, walk out, and never look back. Another part recognized the complicated emotions swirling inside me, anger and hurt. Yes, but also an unwelcome twinge of satisfaction at seeing them humbled and beneath it all. The stubborn remnants of familial love that I had never quite managed to extinguish. "I'll need to think about it." I finally said, my voice carefully neutral. "This isn't a small amount of money, and I have responsibilities to my company and investors." Of course, my father said quickly, relief evident in his voice. He clearly had expected an outright refusal. "Take all the time you need. We just wanted to reconnect with you first and foremost. The money is secondary to having you back in our lives." As I drove back to my hotel that night, their request echoed in my mind, along with years of accumulated hurts and disappointments. $300,000 was a sum I could now afford without significant hardship. But the decision facing me wasn't really about money. It was about forgiveness boundaries, and what I owed to the family that had given me life, but had also caused me considerable pain. I needed time to sort through these complex emotions and decide how to respond to their sudden reappearance in my life and their financial request. Whatever I decided would shape not only their futures, but also the person I was becoming. Sleep eluded me that night in my hotel room. I lay awake, replaying the dinner conversation and the years of history that had led to this moment. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had given my siblings $200,000 each to start their adult lives, money that had ultimately been squandered. Now they were asking me for $300,000 after leaving me to fend for myself. Memories surfaced unbidden. I remembered being 12 years old, coming home with a bloody nose and torn backpack after some bullies had targeted me for being the computer nerd. My mother had cleaned me up, but then quickly left to attend Jason's football practice. "Just stay away from those boys," she had advised, before rushing out the door, leaving me alone with my humiliation and fear. I thought about my sophomore year at MIT when I had contracted severe pneumonia. I had called home barely able to speak through my fever and coughing. "Take some medicine and get rest," my father had said. "We can't come out there right now. Jason has a big interview for an internship this week." I had spent a week in my dorm room relying on my roommate to bring me soup and check that I was still breathing. And then, there was the darkest period of my startup journey, when DataShield's prototype had crashed a week before our presentation to investors. I had called my parents, desperately needing just a word of encouragement. The call had gone to voicemail. When my father returned it 3 days later, he had talked for 10 minutes about Melissa's new job before asking almost as an afterthought how that computer thing of mine was going. These memories fueled a simmering anger, a sense of justice denied that now demanded recognition. Yet there were other memories too. My mother reading to me when I was very young before my siblings' activities took precedence. My father teaching me to ride a bike with patience I rarely saw in later years. Rare moments of connection when they had shown pride in my achievements, however fleeting those moments were. The next morning, I called Paul, not just my investor, but the closest thing to a mentor I had in my life. $300,000 isn't the issue, I told him after explaining the situation. I could write that check today. It's what it represents. It's the principle. Paul was silent for a moment before responding. "Henry, I'm going to tell you something I don't often share," he said finally. "When I was building my first company, my brother asked me for money to save his failing business. We'd never been close. He was the favorite, the charmer, the one everyone bet on to succeed. I refused out of pride and hurt. His business failed. His marriage fell apart under the stress, and he developed a drinking problem that took years to overcome. We didn't speak for a decade." He paused, and I could hear the weight of regret in his voice. I had the money. I could have helped him, and still maintained boundaries. Instead, I chose to make a point, and that point cost us both dearly. We reconciled eventually, but those were 10 years we'll never get back. "So, you think I should just give them the money?" I asked, surprised and a little disappointed. "No," Paul replied firmly. "I think you should decide what role you want your family to play in your life going forward and let that guide your decision. If you never want to see them again, then refusing is the easy choice. But if there's any part of you that wants a relationship with them, even a completely restructured one with firm boundaries, then consider using this situation as leverage for honest conversation and real change." After my call with Paul, I spent the day walking around Boston, the city where I had grown up, feeling invisible in my own family. By evening, I had made my decision. I texted my father asking him to gather everyone at their house the next day at 2. I also requested that he invite no one else and prepare for a serious conversation. When I arrived, they were all waiting in the living room, the tension palpable. I had dressed formally in a suit I would typically wear to investor meetings, partly as armor and partly to reinforce the business-like nature of what I was about to propose. Before we discuss any financial arrangements, I began standing while they sat there. Are things that need to be said. For the next hour, I spoke more honestly to my family than I ever had before. I detailed the years of feeling overlooked and undervalued. I described the crushing financial burden I had carried through college, while watching my siblings receive support I had been denied. I explained how their absence during my struggles and accomplishments had affected me. "Do you know what it feels like?" I asked my parents directly, "to achieve something you've worked toward for years, to finally prove your worth, only to have the people who should care most barely acknowledge it. To send invitations to the opening of your company headquarters, and have your entire family not even bother to show up." My mother began to cry quietly. My father looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. Jason, surprisingly, was the first to speak. "I never thought about it that way," he admitted. "When Mom and Dad gave me the money, I just took it for granted. I never questioned why you didn't get the same. I should have." Samantha nodded in agreement. "We were selfish," she said softly. "All of us. We were so caught up in our own lives, our own plans. I never stopped to consider how unfair it was to you." Melissa, the youngest and perhaps the most sheltered from reality, seemed genuinely shocked. "I didn't know you had to work so many jobs in college," she said. "Mom and Dad always just said you were doing fine, that you had everything under control." My father finally looked up. "We made a terrible mistake, Henry," he said, his voice unsteady. "At the time we justified it by telling ourselves that you were more capable, more independent than your siblings, that you didn't need the same support. The truth is, we failed you as parents. We took the path of least resistance," my mother added through her tears. "Your siblings asked for more, demanded more attention and support. You were always so self-sufficient, so we let ourselves focus on them. It wasn't fair, and there's no excuse that can make it right. Their admissions were a start, but I needed to be clear about where we stood now. I'm not here for apologies alone, I said. I'm here to establish new terms for our relationship moving forward. I laid out my proposal. I would help them save the house and establish a financial plan to stabilize their retirement. In exchange, all of us, including my siblings, would attend family therapy sessions to address the patterns and dynamics that had led to this situation. Additionally, I wanted my parents to volunteer weekly at a scholarship foundation I was establishing for underprivileged students to develop a better understanding of the struggles many young people face without family support. This isn't charity, I made clear. It's an investment in the possibility of a healthier family relationship. If at any point you're not willing to do the work, the financial support stops. My conditions were met with varying reactions. My father initially bristled at the therapy requirement, seeing it as an unnecessary intrusion. "We can sort this out ourselves as a family," he protested. "We've had 35 years to sort it out ourselves," I countered. "How has that worked so far?" Jason surprised me by supporting my terms immediately. "He's right, Dad," he said. "We're all messed up in different ways, and we've never been honest with each other about it. If Henry's willing to help after everything, the least we can do is try it his way." Samantha agreed as well, adding that she had briefly seen a therapist after her business failed and found it helpful. Melissa seemed the most resistant, uncomfortable with the idea of examining her privileged upbringing and its consequences. My mother was the one who finally convinced my father. "Richard," she said firmly, "we're in no position to negotiate. More importantly, this isn't just about the money. This is about having a relationship with our son, something we've nearly lost through our own actions." Eventually, they all agreed to my terms, though I could see the reluctance in some of their expressions. I had anticipated this and had brought paperwork prepared by my lawyer, a simple contract outlining the financial support I would provide and the conditions attached to it. "One more thing," I said as they reviewed the document. "I need you all to understand that this arrangement doesn't erase the past. I'm not doing this because I've forgotten or because all is forgiven. I'm doing this because despite everything I want to see if there's a possibility for something better between us. But that will take time, honesty, and consistent effort from everyone." As I left the house that day, I felt neither the vindication I had sometimes imagined in my darker moments, nor the warm reconciliation depicted in feel-good movies. Instead, I felt something more complex, a cautious step toward a future where my relationship with my family might be based on mutual respect rather than old patterns of neglect and favoritism. Whether this investment in family healing would pay off remained to be seen, but for the first time in many years, I was engaging with my family on my own terms, with clear boundaries and expectations. That alone represented a profound shift in the family dynamic and in my own sense of agency within it. 6 months after that confrontational family meeting, I sat in a comfortable chair in Dr. Winter's office, looking around at my family gathered for our weekly therapy session. The transformation from our first awkward defensive session to now was remarkable, though the journey had been far from smooth. Our first few therapy sessions had been tense affairs. My father, true to form, had attempted to control the narrative, presenting a sanitized version of our family history that minimized the favoritism and neglect I had experienced. My siblings had initially been reluctant to acknowledge their own complicity, having benefited from the unequal distribution of family resources and attention. Dr. Winters, a family therapist with 30 years of experience, had skillfully navigated these defenses, gently but firmly guiding us toward greater honesty. "We can only heal what we acknowledge," she had reminded us repeatedly. The breakthrough came in our 4th session, when my mother, after listening to me, described a particularly painful childhood memory of being left alone on my birthday while the family attended Jason's championship game, broke down. "Completely. I failed you," she had sobbed, reaching for my hand across the space between our chairs. "We justified it 1,000 different ways, but the truth is, we took the path of least resistance. Your siblings demanded more attention, and you asked for so little that it became easy to focus on them. It wasn't because we loved you less, but our actions showed otherwise, and I am so deeply sorry for that." Her raw honesty had opened a floodgate. One by one, my family members began to confront their roles in the dynamic that had left me feeling like an outsider. Jason admitted that he had been aware of the preferential treatment, but had been too comfortable with his position as the golden child to question it. Samantha acknowledged that she had deliberately commanded attention, afraid of being overlooked. Even Melissa, the youngest, recognized how she had been taught to expect special treatment simply for being the baby of the family. Beyond the therapy sessions, other aspects of our agreement had led to unexpected growth. My parents' volunteer work at the Scholarship Foundation had opened their eyes to the struggles of students without family support. My father in particular had been humbled by the determination of young people facing obstacles far greater than anything I had encountered. "There's this kid Marcus," he told me one day over coffee, "a new regular ritual for us. Homeless at 16, worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, now headed to Stanford on scholarship. Reminds me of you in some ways, smart-driven, independent." But I keep thinking, what if he had parents who supported him from the beginning? How much more could he have accomplished without having to fight so hard just to survive? The question hung between us, a tacit acknowledgement of all I might have achieved with the same support my siblings had received. Professionally, I had continued to build DataShield into an industry leader recently, securing a major contract with the federal government to enhance their data security protocols. But my perspective on success had evolved significantly. In the months following our family confrontation, I had found myself reevaluating what truly mattered to me. The drive to prove my worth, to achieve a success so undeniable that my family would have to acknowledge it, had been a powerful motivator. But it had also left me with a kind of emotional tunnel vision, defining my value primarily through professional accomplishments. Working with my own personal therapist alongside the family sessions, I had begun to expand my definition of success to include meaningful relationships, personal growth, and contributing to causes larger than myself. The Scholarship Foundation I had established now supported 20 students each year, providing not just financial assistance, but mentorship and emotional support, the things I had lacked during my own education. My siblings, too, were finding new directions. With my guidance, Jason had enrolled in a coding boot camp, discovering an aptitude for technology that surprised everyone, including himself. I might have found this path years ago if I hadn't been pushed so hard into sports, he reflected during one family session. Samantha had pivoted from her failed salon business to beauty product development, creating a line of organic skincare that was gaining traction with a small but devoted customer base. I had connected her with some contacts in the industry and provided some initial capital, but insisted she develop a solid business plan first. Melissa had perhaps shown the most dramatic growth. After years of drifting, she had enrolled in a teacher certification program, inspired partly by her volunteer work with underprivileged children that I had required as part of our agreement. "I've been given so much without appreciating it," she told me recently. "Teaching these kids, seeing how hard they work for opportunities I took for granted, it's changed how I see everything." My parents had adhered to their financial recovery plan, selling their oversized house and moving to a more modest condo that better suited their retirement needs. The proceeds, combined with my financial support, had stabilized their situation. More importantly, they had begun to rebuild their relationship with me now, based on genuine interest and respect, rather than what I could provide for them. The most profound moment in our family's healing process came unexpectedly at the launch event for DataShield's newest security platform. Unlike the headquarters opening they had all missed years earlier, my entire family attended this event. They sat in the front row as I presented our innovation to a room full of industry leaders and press. When I finished my presentation to enthusiastic applause, I looked out to see my father wiping away tears. A man who had rarely shown emotion throughout my childhood, now openly moved by my achievement. My mother beamed with genuine pride, not the performed version I had seen at my graduation. Afterward at the reception, my father approached me uncharacteristically hesitant. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and serious. "Watching you up there today, leading this company you built from nothing, showing such knowledge and confidence, I've never been more proud in my life. And I realize now that I've wasted years not seeing what was right in front of me, my son, the most accomplished person I've ever known." The words I had longed to hear for decades finally came, not when I was desperate for validation, but when I had already learned to validate myself. They mattered still, but in a different way than they would have before. As I reflect on my journey from the overlooked middle child to successful entrepreneur, to someone actively rebuilding family bonds, I'm struck by how differently things might have turned out. Had I refused to help my family in their time of need, choosing retribution over the harder path of reconciliation, I might have felt a momentary satisfaction. But I would have lost the opportunity for something more valuable, the chance to transform a damaged family dynamic into something healthier for all of us. The money that once divided us, the $200,000 my siblings received, and I didn't had long since vanished, spent on failed ventures and unsustainable lifestyles. What remained was the more valuable currency of human connection, imperfect but genuine. I've learned that true success isn't measured by bank accounts or company valuations. Though financial security certainly matters. It's measured by our ability to grow beyond our wounds, to create meaning from adversity, and to build relationships that contribute to our wholeness rather than diminishing it. The path to healing isn't linear. We still have difficult moments in therapy instances where old patterns reassert themselves. There are days when the hurt feels fresh again, when I question whether this experiment in family reconciliation will ultimately succeed. But I've come to appreciate that healing isn't about reaching a perfect endpoint, it's about committing to the journey, however messy and uncomfortable it might be. Sometimes the people who push you to the edge of a cliff are the ones who help you discover you can fly. I don't know if my family and I will ever completely heal the fractures of our past, but I've learned that letting go of bitterness isn't a gift you give to others, it's freedom you grant yourself. What would you do if you were in my position? Would you have given your family a second chance? Or would you have chosen a different path? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and redemption. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes our deepest wounds become the cracks where our greatest light shines through.